What's poppin', people? Welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a while. I really don't have any excuses besides I just wasn't feeling up to making YouTube videos. Did contest prep this past whole fall, wound up going to NPC Nationals, did very, very poorly. If you'd like me to make a video about my experience with that, let me know, drop it in the comments, I'll go ahead and do that. But yeah, I've been off, a couple life changes, work, bodybuilding, etc. But we're getting back to it. So the first video that we're getting back into today is called Why Bodybuilders Look Different Today Than They Did in the 70s. This video was put out by Attia, and it's featuring Derek from More Plates, More Dates. So considering the fact that it's Derek and someone who has MD in their YouTube name, I'm assuming they're gonna talk about steroids. I'm assuming the main differences that they're going to pick up on are going to be the types of gear and the quality of gear and the quantity of gear that is used. I think are gonna be kind of the main things that they bring up. But some other things that they could bring up is gonna be food quality, training quality, just the amount of the equipment that we have today is more specified and built towards building specific muscles versus just lifting weights. So I'm interested to see what they actually talk about. I'll go ahead and pause and react over here, give you guys a little bit of feedback if there's anything that I feel like I need to add.
In my gym, I have a lot of pictures of bodybuilders, like black and whites, that I enjoy, and there's just a real clear difference between Frank Zane, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sergio Oliva, to Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman, and I don't know when that jump took place. Maybe Lee Haney, maybe.
That's a pretty great list of the people that he has. As far as the classic guys, can't go wrong. Arnold, Frank, Sergio. As far as the new guys, obviously naming some Olympia champions, so it's pretty easy to see. But yeah, I think he is right. I think Lee is one of kind of the turning points. Lee was an 8-time Mr. Olympia during the 80s. So I think that's kind of around the time where a lot of it really stepped up. Lee was one of the last mass monster champions. He was one of the last few to bring a really aesthetic physique before they really started to go, oh, well, how big can bodybuilders get?
Dorian Yates, but somewhere in there was a real transition in physique. And not to debate which of those is the best. I think everyone can have their own preference for which era of physique was the most, was their favorite. But what is the...
Don't forget to hit his ads up.
The things that can impact your physique. Genetics, okay, that's not changing. Nutrition and knowledge of nutrition, that's clearly evolved. Training and knowledge of training, that's clearly evolved. Drug use, that's clearly evolved. And then maybe just even injection. I've talked to bodybuilders today who say that they're actually injecting compounds in their muscles to alter the shape. They're injecting fats into muscles to actually create some sculpting. So that, again, that's probably...
First of all, Disco has joined me. You'll see little bits of him. He's just going to kind of come in and out and does what he wants. That's an interesting point, though. He's bringing up injectable tissue, injectable stuff like synthol or injectable fats that people will use to inflate their muscles and stuff. I feel like that was a lot more common in the 90s. I think that kind of died out of popularity in the 2000s when people started realizing A, the health issues, and B, the fact that it just kind of looks goofy. But that's one of those things I didn't really even think about. But I don't think it's as prevalent nowadays. But I definitely think it was super prevalent in that time that he was talking about, where it was that big transition period from those old school physiques to the modern ones.
Something new. Let's put that one aside. As far as so of the three, evolution of training, evolution of nutrition, evolution of drugs, how would you rate the relative balance of those three for the difference of a 1970s physique versus a physique today of the best bodybuilders?
Derek's gonna say drugs are number one.
Probably drugs at the top, almost certainly, followed by, I would say, nutrition, probably, and training at the bottom.
And how much emphasis on each of those? 50, 40, 10?
That's tough, because these get scrutinized to hell. Because it's I'm gonna put a number on it, people will be like, how do you think diet is only 20%? So, because a lot of these things don't live without the other, so you could definitely lean heavier and say, well, if you eat nothing, the drugs aren't going to do anything. So I would say, just in order of importance. If you did perfect diet, perfect training, with all of the modern knowledge that we have now, your ceiling for muscle growth potential could be as much as 50 to 100 pounds lower as a natural, depending on height, depending on genetic response. By the way, I don't want to forget on the GH stuff, one thing that is interesting is even in acromegalic patients, the incidence of death seems to be cardiovascular almost like significantly more than cancer incidence. So if there's anything to discern from actual human literature, it's a good point. Significantly chronically elevated IGFs into even 40 years old, these individuals are dying from congestive heart failure and things like that, as opposed to.
And that's really interesting. So not even atherosclerotic disease. They're also probably. I have to look into this. Actually, it's a very good point. I should look at the acromegaly literature.
One of the interesting things is how much fluid retention they hold and the stress that has on the heart too.
So basically, what they're saying is with bodybuilders getting way beyond normal size, the acromegaly is the extremely large people. They're basically saying that the larger you get, especially the more that you take stuff like growth hormone is going to increase not just muscle size, but generally all growth signals through your body. So they're saying, the larger you get, the more fluid you're holding, the larger your organs are going to get, and that winds up putting stress and heart failure on you. So what they're mentioning is it's less like heart attacks, like clogged arteries, etc., and it's more like actual systemic failure of the organ because the organ has become overtaxed.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. They also probably would be, I'm guessing, maybe more prone to aortic dissection because they probably have larger connective tissue, things like that. Yeah. Okay, so you're putting drugs at the top of the list, and then nutrition, and then training, I think was the order you had them in. So let's talk about the drug use. So I've spoken to 70's bodybuilders, and if they're being honest with me, and I have no reason to believe they're not, right? Like, what do they? You would think, yeah. Like, what do they care? I was shocked at how little drug use was going on back then amongst the best of the best, and we're talking like 1 to 200 milligrams of testosterone a week, 8 weeks at a time. 8 on, 8 off, 8 on, 8 off. In other words, they're basically taking TRT.
Yeah, they're not telling the truth.
You don't. Okay, so that's your view.
Most of them, almost certainly, are not. When you're saying you're taking a borderline female HRT Dianabol dose, it's like back then that's what it was prescribed for, or like muscle wasting in old age or whatever. Some of the old SEPA Dianabol ads are hilarious, by the way. But those dosages are almost impossible to wrap your head around producing outcomes that they are, like, you might as well have stayed natural almost at that point. So, I too bought into the idea of, well, they seem to have consistent stories. They seem to have all taken 1 shot of Primo a week and, 1 to 2 Dianabol or what have you. And it's just not an outcome that you see as reproducible ever in those dosage quantities. So, maybe on the hyper extreme outlier scenario, you might have a guy who a total weekly dosage of a few 100 milligrams across everything he's using, he may hyper respond and get huge. But I would say the majority of the guys competing at the Olympia level were still, I've heard of people slugging D-ball by the bottles. Like, it's
even back in the 70s.
Yeah, it's just certain people are more outspoken about.
I know I've heard a story. I couldn't tell you where I heard it, of course, which is going to ruin the credibility of it. But there's a story that Arnold used to have a candy dish just sitting on his kind of dining room table, and that candy dish was full of D-ball in the off season and VAR on the on season, and he would just grab one whenever he left the house, him and Franco. So to what extent that is true, but that's something that I've heard is stuff, especially like the orals were getting fairly abused back in the day, because they didn't really know as much about the toxicity and about the negative effects. They only really knew what it did positively for you because it was developed for the positive effects, and it was marketed for the positive effects. They didn't really have to say all of the side effects and negative effects back in the day. Plus, with them being newer compounds, he didn't really know what they were. So yeah, I've definitely heard of the rampant kind of oral use and abuse. As far as the testosterone dosages, I've heard, we always hear these older guys saying, oh, I didn't really use much, I didn't take this, I didn't take that, I only took a tiny bit of this. And there's kind of a fine line to ride. So a lot of times, yeah, like if they're saying they took like 100 milligrams of testosterone a week, might as well have just stayed natural unless you were not producing testosterone at all, in which case you would not have gotten the physique that you've got. But with that said, the hyper-responder tendency, especially at the level of genetics that the bodybuilders had back in the day, because that's the thing, you didn't really get into bodybuilding unless you naturally already had a little bit of tone to you, a little bit of something going on back in the day. Because there weren't really bodybuilders for you to see and go, oh, I want to look like that. There wasn't a whole lot of that around. So it was usually pretty much guys who were kind of inclined towards it. So if they have stories of using low amounts and getting good results from it, kind of take it with a grain of salt, grain of sand, whatever you want to call it. But just be aware that you don't need huge doses like a lot of modern guys are taking. I'll tell you, there's a lot of guys taking 4th, 5th, and 6th place at regional NPC shows that are taking 4 and 5 times what the 70's champions were taking. And that's even considering if we double what the 70's champions say they were taking, there's still guys taking 4 times that at a regional level. The biggest thing about it is be smart, get with a coach who knows what they're doing, learn about it yourself in addition to that as well, just in case your coach doesn't actually know what they're doing. And just make sure that you're being smart and being safe, and start small. Even if you think, oh, these old guys, their small doses aren't gonna help me, etc., 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 try it first. Because if you've never done anything, those small doses might actually make a difference for you.
You know, they're abuse than others seemingly, and it seems like the ones that are outspoken are more. This guy Pete Gronkowski, I don't know if you've heard of him before, but looked incredible. But the guy used like thousands and thousands and thousands of milligrams, and I can understand why you would arrive at that logic to take that, because there was nothing to tell you otherwise. So if you're competing against the guy at the highest level and there's relatively high stakes, you see a guy like Arnold getting movie roles and stuff, it's like the peak of achievement as a bodybuilder back then. You could do social media, you could do anything. You would try and emulate presumably what he was doing or something of that nature. To think that you're not going to escalate your dose past 1 to 2 Dianabol and a shot of Primo or what have you, or a shot of Nandrolone because you didn't want to hurt yourself, it's like, shut up, dude.
Yeah, I feel like I saw a video kind of recently of Tom Platz discussing this.
He had changed the story. Yeah. With that said, his original breakdown was relatively conservative still, but he's done public presentations about drug use back in the 80s, 90s, and he, you know, you could tell he was pretty reserved even back then. He handled the situation very delicately. You could tell he was picking his words carefully as he spoke. But more recently, he came out and said his dose was like, I don't know, a third of that or something. It's like, okay, maybe like, you know, in 40 years or something, I don't expect you to remember exactly what you took, but to say your peak dose was 1/3 of what it was, I don't know, like I just don't really believe it.
Well, at the other end of the spectrum, I've spoken to one bodybuilder who, and I couldn't believe it, but he said at one point he was up to, are you ready for it? 50 grams of testosterone in a week.
There's no way.
50 grams. It's like 50 vials. No, it's not. It's like 25 vials. But still, that's disgusting.
Check that much.
I mean, I was like, how is that possible?
You're running a rejection sense.
How are you managing?
I think a lot of people just don't know what they take too. Yeah. Because oftentimes you ask people on TRT even, what's your dose? Like, oh, I take like, you know, half this.
We noodle with patients between 100 and 120 milligrams a week. Like literally, we will make movements that fine, 20 milligrams a week.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people, they just go by, oh, my doctor told me to take this much of a syringe, and then they kind of just remember some rough number, but oftentimes they don't know how many milligrams per milliliter, what they're using is, they don't know what their dosage is, they just take some scheduled protocol, and they stay on it for years, and then they don't even know what they're doing. But 50 grams is like, it's impossible. You would have to dedicate your life to inject it, essentially. That would be your full-time job, just sitting there pinning like 5 to 10 cc barrels of test all day.
Oh, God. So, given how remarkable the physiques were in the 70's at the top of the, at the top of the food chain in the Olympia, would you agree with me that it's a different, like, something dramatically changed in the late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, and it seems to be the emergence of growth hormone and insulin abuse, as well as the escalation of drugs to an even more extreme magnitude and the availability potentially. And granted, they were prescribed readily, seemingly, but people also seemingly push the limit more, and there's the emergence of underground lab preparations and things of this nature. So my understanding, at least, is, and there's no literature to document, like, oh, you know, this dosage equated to this, therefore this is why it happened, but it seems to be dose escalation of anabolics to some extent, but more so the implementation of growth hormone coupled with exogenous insulin use.
And they're using insulin because of how anabolic it is?
Well, that's the goal, is what they think it is. And obviously, like, there's terminology that may not be exact on that, but it's like, that is what they believe it's doing is shuttling a kind of like super physiologic amount of nutrients into the muscle, because also when you take GH, you are acutely insulin resistant, so
you need a little insulin to overcome that.
Yeah, they're almost like doing both things at the same time is the goal. And often when you're using really high doses of GH, and fortunately this isn't as problematic in replacement dosages, so I don't want people to extrapolate out, oh, GH equals, you know, chronic insulin resistance necessarily, but at the dosages people are using, they can induce, you know, diabetes essentially. Like, you could end up the diabetic from just your GH abuse. And oftentimes, to relieve stress off the pancreas and the beta cells, they will use exogenous insulin, so you don't have to produce as much endogenously to actually accommodate the amount of carbohydrate intake and just overall nutrients. Because these diets get to, you know, to maintain a 300-pound physique, you're pounding 5,000 calories a day sometimes.
So that is one thing, yeah. The amount of growth hormone, amount of insulin is definitely something that's a big factor in the amount of muscle tissue and the type of muscle tissue and things like that. It's also, of course, as you can guess, a huge factor in the health itself. So the big thing I will say about that at the end there, as far as the calories go, a 300-pound physique, 5,000 calories, etc. That may be some people, but you have guys back in the day that were eating tons and tons of calories too. Myself, this entire contest prep that I was at about 3,500 calories for the entire prep. I went from 248 all the way down to 209 at my lowest, eating 3,500 calories. So actually, well, I got down to 214 eating 3,500, and then I tried to fill out and upped it to 4,000, and that dropped me to 209 because my body was ready for it. So it's one of those things where it's your metabolism, it's your muscle mass, all your muscle mass contributes to your metabolism, but you have a naturally high metabolism or low metabolism. You have an activity level, you have levels of stress, things like that. So especially these 300-pound guys, 5,000 calories might not even be that much. 5,000 might be their diet. I think that's what Jay said, is he dieted on 5,000 calories. But yeah, that's one of those really important things to kind of factor into it, is the bigger and further that bodybuilding goes, the more the things that create bodybuilding need to be used, and then that's going to increase and kind of make more dangerous, unless you're paying attention, any sport. Anything you do more and more and more of is going to be more and more increased risk, because, you know, every time you do one thing, you get a little bit of risk with it, and if you do it twice, you get twice the risk. So that's one of the big things about it. As far as the difference between old bodybuilders versus new bodybuilders, I think there's one important factor that they didn't necessarily mention, but I'm not sure if it should have to be mentioned, and that's just that the inherent passage of time. You know, every year, you know, every time to beat the old Mr. Olympia, you have to be better than him. And there's only so conditioned you can get. And depending on your physique, there's only as aesthetic as you can get. And then depending on the judges, they may think this guy's aesthetics are different than your aesthetics, and they like his more than yours. So size really became the game that was played. That became the big defining factor. Like, I'm sure you've probably heard powerlifters before. I've heard a million times. I powerlift instead of bodybuilding because if I lift 5 pounds more than that guy, you can't tell me I didn't lift 5 pounds more than that guy. But if I think I look better than that guy and you think he looks better than me, then we can't really have a agreement there, because it's opinion based. So for bodybuilding, that's one of those things where they, instead of lift 5 more pounds, they added 5 more pounds. They were 5 more pounds bigger. And it became kind of the big thing that was chased in those 90s and 2000s, was this, how big can we possibly get? And it became an issue that was leading to, you know, those large guts, and leading to a lot of disinterest in bodybuilding, and, you know, the freak factors. And I think that kind of mid 2000s, that really slowed down or mid 2010s, something like that, kind of after, towards the end of / after Phil's reign, Phil Heath's reign, that it really slowed down as far as the focus on size. People started realizing A, the health issues, B, just big doesn't look good if it's not lean and aesthetic and things like that. So they started to back down a little bit, and I'm pretty happy with the way the bodybuilding is going at the moment. I love having the different divisions. The physique and classic physique is awesome. I'm glad they finally put a weight cap on men's physique because those guys are looking silly. But yeah, that's one of the big things that's really cool about modern bodybuilding, is that it's reached a new level. Everything about bodybuilding is taking yourself to that new level. And if you're competitive bodybuilding, you're taking yourself to a level above the level of the guy next to you. So that's, I think, what the biggest difference in the physiques is overall. I mean, yeah, there's new drugs, there's new diet, there's new exercise, but I think the biggest thing is just passage of time. I think it's just the evolution of the sport. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Let me know if you're glad that I am back, and if you have any suggestions for things for me to react to going forward. Thanks again so much for joining, and I'll see you next time.